Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and sea to the far corners of the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
As one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, Excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
I've seen him kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazi.
For those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men, fear the way, human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell is a very interesting place. There's a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome, everybody, into Garden of Doom, and this week we are welcoming in one of our returning guests. I believe this is his third appearance into the show, and it's Mark Olly, who previously did a show on the Paraska Skulls, Giants, the Crystal Skulls, a bunch of anthropological, archaeological stuff, and he also did a show in our trilogy on Arthur, and he was the Polycon or Polychronicon of Arthur and the Green Man, straight there in that wonderful Arthur arc we did, which was Arthur Three Ways, which people have really enjoyed. So if you are interested in King Arthur at all, listen to all three of those shows, and you won't regret it. So, Mark, first of all, thank you very much for coming back into the show. We always appreciate having you on.
Absolute pleasure to be here again.
Great. And Mark is coming to us from the UK. So again, the garden goes international, and our UK connection works again. So, if you listen to the prior shows, you know that Mark, constantly makes the mistake for him, but bonus for me, of booking himself for future shows, in conversation. And he has, he's got a book about Robin Hood, spelled Robynhoode, and you should absolutely buy the book. And he's obviously, I always give the guest playing a chance to promote their stuff. Obviously, that's just a podcast, etiquette 101. But I don't know what, I tried to read books before the guests come on, but I have to admit, I'm getting worse at it. I just don't have time. Blame the PwC. If you know, you know, but I'm doing way too much work for them on, other stuff. And I love that stuff too, but I'm 54. I need my 8 hours of sleep. And plus those of you who know my, when I'm recording this and when I drop it are at the same time. But right now I'm still in the midst of La Sicaria, being in South America doing Sicaria things. So, I have to take care of myself, which is, very difficult. I was never trained to do that in the last 5.5 decades of my life. So, anyway, so enough about me. Nobody cares. Or if you do, you've heard it before. So, Mark, welcome to the show. Tell the folks a little bit about you. And as I always mention, I confirm that you are, in fact, an archaeologist.
Yes, I am. In fact, I started off as a child volunteer digger with my dad, who was also a volunteer digger. My dad was alive in the 1950s and 60s as a digger. 1960s and 70s, he dumped me into this Roman dig site at aged 8 years old, and I dove in and went scraping in the sand and pulled out this piece of Roman pottery and went, "Whoa, look what I found!" And everybody went, "Put it back," because of course you're not supposed to do that. So that was my first lesson in archaeology when I was 8, and I kind of stuck at it. Finished up training with Liverpool University, ended up on enormous digs. I mean, we did the biggest monastic dig in Europe. We did one over here at Norton Priory, this huge, like, Welsh Templar preceptory, Augustinian abbey. So that was incredible. I've done other things, castles and usual everything you can imagine. So yeah, left it to go in the music business as a drummer. I did that pro for just over 20 years. Came back, thought, what am I going to do now? Because I'm getting older, and started writing books, as you say. So I've got quite a few of those out now. I think the 9th book is due out in August. But it takes me a while to do them. It takes me about 3 years to get a book out in all, on average. The King Arthur one was an exception. That took 45 years, but, it's a big subject. It's one of those. I've got to say the Robin Hood book, let's get back on topic. I mean, that was a great one because it's kind of a precursor. It's a pre-run to the King Arthur book in that it is a polychronicon. By definition, it runs in chronological order. It's the chronological life of Robin Hood. But that one, from start to finish, it was a conscious effort to do it, and it took 4 years. So, there's some amazing stuff in there, absolutely incredible stuff in there. I mean, I've got the privilege of living in not far away from the areas that Robin frequented. So I've got access to material that maybe other people, would find harder to get hold of. But no, it's an absolute joy to do that. So, I also do all sorts of other things as well. I'm on Ancient Aliens at the moment, the current series that's running out there in the States.
That's great.
I'm on the one on crop circles, the one on obelisks, and I believe there's a couple of others I'm on as well. So that's quite good,
well, look who's in danger of booking himself again. But you're already booked for a future show. I don't even remember what the topic is, but I know it's in our calendar. So,
well, I've got a book on a UFO crash coming out on Flying Disc Press, so it's probably that one. That'll be August when it gets released.
Right,
so
absolutely.
I can come back and spill the beans on that one, but I'm not going to say too much of that. I don't want to steal my thunder.
Watch you on Ancient Aliens, buy the book, and then we'll talk about it on the show. Yeah, no, that's amazing. That's terrific. So, everybody knows who Robin Hood is, they think. The Adventures of Robin Hood, the cartoon version from Disney with the foxes, Robin Hood. One of my earliest childhood memories, I saw that movie every single year. I would get my grandparents to take me, my other grandparents, anyone I could, I'd see that movie. I like The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn. Probably if I saw it now, it would drive me insane. We saw Kevin Costner make a stab at it, and no bueno. And then Charlie Hunnam, I think, did a version, or somebody who looked like Charlie Hunnam. I can't remember if he was King Arthur or Robin Hood, but either way, it was an abomination.
You've got the Bruckheimer one, and then you've got the one that came even after that. Bruckheimer had a shot at doing it fairly realistically, which actually does. I mean, a lot of what he's got, in his movie, he's got. I've got that in the book, so that's
really
interesting. Oh yeah, there's quite a lot of overlap there. The Kate Blanchett doing the village in the middle of nowhere routine. He pretty much nailed some of that. Still got loads of nonsense in it though. And then you got the one that looks like Assassin's Creed. The last one that came out. Do you remember that one? And you've got like the Sheriff of Nottingham wearing this really cool grey, up to the minute sci-fi type jacket on, and all sorts of bonkers in that. Great action movie, can't knock it, but the tales were a bit fuzzy around the edges.
You're just taking a name that people know and trying to throw it in there. So here's the basic story that people know, and I probably shouldn't have to repeat it, but just in case people don't know, because there's a lot of younger listeners, and maybe they don't. Maybe they just grew up on Call of Duty and Assassin's Creed and anime, and maybe Robin Hood never really got to their way. So anyway, Robin Hood is a Saxon lord, Robin of Locksley. He comes back from, I think, the Crusades, and to find that his father's holdings, he's a Saxon, it's after the Norman invasion, and the Normans have taken his father's property. So he is no longer a noble. The Saxon nobles, of course, were kind and benevolent lords to their serfs, tenants, and peoples, and everybody was happy under the Saxons. The Normans were horrible and oppressive. And Robyn, realizing that he's lost everything, decides to right those wrongs, and in the course of it, finds a band of sympathetic merry men, and he basically famously steals from the rich, gives from the poor. Basically, has a hidden town in Sherwood Forest. The sheriff of Nottingham is always trying to track him down. The guy of Gisborne is I guess, the knight that's involved, and of course, evil Prince John, who is the regent of England, who wants to be the king because his brother Richard the Lionhearted was captured by the Saracens in the Crusades. And what we don't know is that and all of this money is titularly to pay for the ransom of Richard, but it's not. Prince John is using it to bribe, to enrich himself, to bribe other lords and men of arms, gens d'armes, and bring everyone to his side. Don't forget the Normans came from Normandy, so get French allies and all sorts of things. But what they don't know is that Richard either was ransomed or released on some sort of program or whatever, and he's coming back with his, some crusader knights that were with them. Of course, they're in their full Templar regalia of white robes with red crosses on it, and somewhere in the midst of this, Robyn meets Maid Marian, who is it's sort of like a Romeo and Juliet thing. She's a Norman, a lordess, a maiden. She's from a noble family, and they fall in love. And she realizes that the Normans are horrible oppressors. And we recently had the same story in RRR, that Indian movie, the Bollywood movie that was on Netflix. And anyway, so they lure Robyn in with a bow tournament, because of course he can't resist his hubris. He almost get captured, but his merry men and are aware that he's walking into a trap. He escapes, and in the end, there's a giant scene. And but right when things look bleakest, Richard the Lionhearted reveals himself, and everyone bows to him. And Richard, makes a pledge to treat the Saxons fairly, unite England, and Normans and Saxons shall live in harmony, sort of like a Camelot moment. That's sort of the cliche Robin Hood story that I did as best as I can in 2 minutes. So Mark is going to tell us the real version of Robin Hood. How much of that is fact, how much of it is fiction, what's the order, and let's hear it. Let's hear what you got, because I'm prepared to be dazzled.
Okay, I'll jump in. Probably about 70-75% of what you said there is right.
Too much.
But there's probably about 25% of it that's not. That's pure Hollywood. I've got to say, I did the same thing with this as I did with the Arthur book. I started off, I think, at the beginning thinking, well, Robin Hood, and his merry men and all this nonsense. It's got to be, it's just a made-up medieval legend. And that's pretty much the angle that everybody takes. It's got no basis in fact. The guy never existed. It's just all been made up. So I started off, bearing in mind I'm doing this in a straight run. So it's like fire the starting pistol, off we go. It's 4 years of work to do the book. So I'm starting it with that basic premise that there's very little fact, and to be honest, odds are I'm not going to find anything. That was my original approach. Straight away, within that first year of doing research, I was just pulling up document after document after document that was proving that clearly this guy was actually there. He actually existed. There's records of him everywhere. Chester, Nottingham, siege of one of the castles, Pontefract Castle, he's there with his dad. There's all kinds of bits of records out there. And I was just amazed at what an awfully shoddy job people have done in the past, because most people have gone, yeah, okay, we know what the legend is, that's it, and they've just walked away. They've not done the background. So let me say straight away, one of the things we did with the book, it's the life and times of the real Robin Hood. So I thought, let's be clever. Let's put his real name on the cover and spell it according to Old English. So you got that ROBYNHOODE, which is fabulous till you look at modern technology. Because if you don't put the right name in, you're not going to find the book on a search engine. So that was a bit kind of, shot myself in the foot there. But at the end of the day, that's his name, and we couldn't have got a title stuck on the front of the book with the name Robin Hood in any other way, because everybody else has done it. It's already out there. So anyway, I dove in and started off, looking at this, and straight away it comes out that this guy, are you ready for this? Take a big deep breath. This guy is not Saxon.
Oh boy. Okay.
Okay. He's many things. He is many things, but he's not a Saxon. In the early legends, because I'm trying to use early sources, he's actually an illegitimate child. I can tell you of whom as well, because I managed to do his family tree. But we'll have to resort to notes for this. He's the illegitimate child of a member of the de Mortimer family, Hawaii de Mortimer. And her first husband, Stephen O'Malley, dies, and she remarries. We think the guy that she remarried was a lesser noble called Hoode, and they produce Robyn. So if Robyn had a second name, a proper noble second name, his second name would be O'Malley. Now, Stephen O'Malley, who was Howie de Mortimer's first husband, is actually descended from Odo, Count of Champagne, who is married to William the Conqueror's sister. So you can't get much more Norman than that. Do you know what I mean? 100% down the line, he's Norman. But the thing is, he's lesser now. He's gone from this lesser noble, Hoode. So he actually gets adopted into the Roumer family. William de Roumer adopts him. And William de Roumer is connected to the nobles of Chester. So if you actually have a look factually at the nobles of Chester, there's this quote where, they're talking to this monk in a monastery, and they're saying, well, what do you know, kind of thing. And he kind of says, well, I can't recite like the Paternoster, which is this medieval prayer. He said, I can't recite that, but I can tell you about the legends of Ranulph de Gournon and Robin Hood. Now, that is one of the oldest quotes. And you think, Ranulph, Earl of Chester, and Robin Hood, why has he put those two together in the same breath? Well, the answer is it's the Gournon family. It's Ranulph that adopts him. So, right up to him being a teenager, right up to him being about 15 or 16, Robyn is actually with the nobles of Chester. So forget anywhere else. If anything, he's associated with Chester, which is really important because Richard the Lionheart actually gives shields to all of these nobles with lions on. And one of the early discoveries I made, probably as I was going into the second year writing the book, is that they are a conclave of lions. So they've got black lions, they've got green lions, they've got yellow lions, they've got red lions, and Richard the Lionheart has a black lion on a red background. And all of these people have got these shields. So you're into medieval politics, you're looking at everything north of the River Trent, if you like, is red. So let's call them the red team.
Okay,
they're all supporting Where
is the River Trent?
Right. Okay, Britain. If you can imagine, cut Britain in half, slice it across, and then sort of go up and across a bit. So kind of the right hand side of Britain isn't part of it, but the Trent kind of cuts up just north of Birmingham and below Manchester, Liverpool, Nottingham, and all kind of the central area. It cuts across the country. So everything above that, so you're talking, Staffordshire, Cheshire, Derbyshire, Lancashire, Cumbria, up into the lowlands, all of that area supports Richard the Lionheart. So in effect, in Britain, you could call that the red team. You go south and you go across to the other coast, and all that lot going down is John, the wicked King John, who follows Richard. Now, John is by trade, he's a tax collector, so he's not very popular, shall we say. So he's the blue team, if you like, because he also the English don't like him because he's literally in bed with the French. You know what I mean? He may as well be French. And the only other team in all this, really, there are two other teams. One is the yellow team, and that's the Scots. So up there with the red line on a yellow background, you've got everybody who's Scottish, up there, up in Alba. But then there's this other little tiny team. It's a tiny little bunch of people. I'm going to call it the green team. And they sit on the border between the red and blue team. Now, they're acting under orders. They're acting under the orders of Richard the Lionheart. And they're foresters. So when you look at that and you realise Nottingham and possibly Sheffield and quite a lot of the other major centres in that strip, that's like no man's land. That's commando territory. And that's where the foresters get sucked into all this. By the time he's kind of 16, 17, he's kind of old enough then to go into the Order of Foresters, which he does. Now, the interesting thing is, you can get a map at this point, you can have a look, just sort of slightly up and to the left of Nottingham, because everybody heads for Nottingham. You'll find Tutbury, Doveridge, Sherwood's just kind of off to one side of it, and then above it, Loxley. So Robyn of Loxley is clearly in the right area. You can kind of nail him down geographically. Loxley's his village, and that seems to be kind of where he was born before he went to Chester. But there's a massive castle there called Chartley, and it's being built during his lifetime by the Earls of Chester. So, there's your connections. It's all starting to make sense. When he marries Maid Marian, because Marmion is the family name for Abbots Bromley, which is down in Staffordshire, he marries her in the church at Doveridge. So you've just gone across. There's your next major site, Doveridge. And the details of the church at Doveridge are just absolutely spectacular. It's definitely the place where he married Maid Marian.
Is in what town or what city?
She originates from Abbots Bromley, which is where they have this legendary horn dance. They dance around with like the horns of deer once a year. It's like a spring festival thing. Folks can Google it. It's famous enough. And they've dated the horns. The dates go all the way back 1,000 years. So that ceremony was going on by the Marmion family when Robyn was still alive. So there is a link there.
Where geographically is it in blue team territory, though?
Oh, no, it's red. It's red, slightly drifting onto green. So he's staying with his own. You know what I mean?
With his own. So it's
staying with his supporters.
They're not star-crossed lovers, or at least not.
No, not really. It's and she's a proper noble, as you pointed out in the story. Like I said, you were 75% there. She is a proper noblesse, if you like. She's from a noble Norman family. The interesting thing is, though, in the Abbots Bromley horn dance, it's a bit like a mummers play, and they have a Maid Marian, a Maid Marmion. They have her in there, but they don't have a Robin Hood. They have a forester with a bow. Oh. So clearly, the ancient ceremony is her family's ceremony. It's got bog all to do with Robyn. It's nothing to do with him. And then if you jump across again, you got Tutbury, which is where Friar Tut comes from, because there was a friary there. So you can even trace back to the fact that Richard the Lionheart actually knew one of the friars there, but back then it was known as Titbury. So I'm going to be polite about this and say I'm really pleased that they changed the name to Tut. Otherwise, Friar Tut wouldn't be as popular as he is now. And I'm going to leave it at that. But, it's known. You can track him down. He's there in the records. So that's quite remarkable. I can give you a birth date for Robyn as well. We think through research, somewhere between 1129 and 1153 he was born, and I'm going to stick a pin in a map, and I think he was born probably in the winter of 1130. So we can get it down pretty much to that close. I'm a bit more vague in the book than that, but I've kind of, done a few more years since then. So we're thinking it's probably the winter of 1130 when he was born. So anyway, once he gets to a decent age, and he becomes a forester, that bit's true. He ends up looking after the forests. But if you do your background research again and you start looking at Sherwood, and there's a few other places in that area as well, Barnsdale Forest and one or two other bits, all around the sort of A1 North Roman road that runs up that part of the country. When you look at these forests, there's loads of Templars. So we're moving on the story a bit here. Lots of those bits of land are owned by Templars, or people with Templar associations, or people bearing Templar arms.
Before we get too far into that, I just want to find out one thing, because he's in this group called the Foresters, which in modern times, I think of a park ranger, which is a nice job, but it's not considered a big deal. Is a forester during the 12th century, would that have been like being a knight or something impressive? Is that something that a noble person's family's child would is that a position of privilege that you'd have to get into, or is it just like a good civil, a decent civil service job?
It's the only way I can describe it is it's one hell of a job. Basically, going all the way back to Anglo-Saxon times, you're going back into 400, 500, 600 AD. The forests were managed as a resource, as a natural resource for all sorts of things, timber and food and everything you can imagine that would grow in a sort of native forest. They didn't just happen by accident. They were actually managed. And verderers or verdigers, which are literally green men, hence, Robin Hood wearing the Lincoln green, which in actual fact isn't Lincoln green at all in the original story. It's I think it's Cumbrian green. He gets it from somewhere else, so it's slightly different. But anyway, he's wearing green because he's a forester, so his robes are dyed green. Also, that's why he ends up fighting commando style, because him and the rest of his troop, his merry men, are foresters. They're all foresters, so they're quite powerful. I know what's going through your head now. You're thinking, well, how did he end up getting from there to the king? Because it's it's a bit of a leap. Well, I'm just rolling the story along. Okay, well, basically what happens is Richard the Lionheart, who is this French-speaking noble king, only actually ends up coming back off crusade and spending maybe 6, 7, 8 months in this country. He's not here for long during his reign. Excuse me. And on one of those visits, when he's here for about 3 months, I think it's the first time he visits here, he's having trouble with Nottingham Castle. And it's a wonderful story because it's in the legends. And it's also in his diary. If you go and check the records, this is fact. He went to Nottingham Castle to sort the sheriff out because he had nothing but trouble with the sheriffs of Nottingham. And this is the king. Anyway, he arrives at Nottingham Castle. He's only there 3 days. He sorts it out because, of course, the castle surrenders immediately because it's Richard the Lionheart, so they're not going to pick a fight. So they just surrender. He comes in. He sorts all the mess out. And then at some point, Richard the Lionheart's out in the forest. Anyway, he sees this bloke coming towards him. And this bloke who's coming towards him sees Richard the Lionheart. And this bloke basically says, "Oi, what are you doing in my forest?" And Richard the Lionheart looks at him and thinks, what the hell's this fella going on about? I don't really get this. And then he does it again. He says, "Oi, what are you doing in my forest? I'm going to chuck you out of this forest." And he has a go at the king. He dives on the king and they start having a punch-up. And this guy's punching the king going, "You're trespassing in the king's forest. I'm the king's forester. I've got the authority to chuck you out. What the hell are you doing here with all these strange knights? Clear off." At which point somebody then points out to this bloke and says, you're beating up the king here. This is Richard the Lionheart. Anyway, the bloke is Robin Hood. And that's how they encounter each other. Robin goes for the king, assuming he's a trespasser. And, of course, as soon as they find out that's who each other is, wonderful story. The king's like, "Well, do you know what, mate? You're only doing your job. That's what I put you here for." And Robin's like, "Whoa, please forgive me, sir. You are my boss," kind of thing. At which point, and you can see why, Richard the Lionheart's like, "Right, okay, you are my man. You are now going to be a knight." And everything changes at that point for Robin, because that's the point where Richard the Lionheart says, "You've got my permission to marry. You can marry Maid Marian now. You've got lands. You've got a house. You're a knight now. You can settle down. Your family's official. You've got a coat of arms. And by the way, if you have any trouble with the Sheriff of Nottingham, just get rid of him. Clear the decks." So when you read the stories of Robin, especially in his later life, and you're thinking, hang on a minute, he's just shot the Sheriff of Nottingham. He's just killed him with a bow and arrow. How can he get away with that? Well, the reason he gets away with it is he represents the king. Robyn is the king to all intents and purposes. He's this point.
The sheriff is a local official. Robyn is he's
regional.
Yeah,
right. Regional. He's red team. He's big now. He's big league. Mainly because he punched the living daylights out of Richard the Lionheart, and got pulled off. But worse ways to start a job. I'm sure there's lots of people out there would love to do that to their boss as an interview. But there you go. So that bit of the story.
I love my bosses. They're great.
That bit of the story is totally true. And again, going back to the records, they've actually got the records in Nottingham Castle of the Sheriffs of Nottingham. And when you go through Robyn's life story, when you look at the early stories, in total, I think he kills 2 of the Sheriff of Nottingham's and Little John kills another one. So that's 3. You get to the records for the castle, lo and behold, there's 3 of them missing. So you can't make it up.
Right.
It's like, shoot, it's a duck. We know why now, because, of course, this is all in the book. I mean, I'm going into very little detail here, but it's, it's all in the book. Robyn, the real Robin Hood's, he's quite a nasty piece of work, really. But considering the times he was alive, you would have to be, you'd have to be rough, tough, and ready for action.
So less Errol Flynn and more Clint Eastwood Western.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because then as Robyn starts to get older, obviously he's climbed the social ladder. You know what I mean? He's started off born as a, illegitimate child to a minor nobleman, and then he gets adopted by a bunch of fairly major noblemen, but he's still only adopted, so he can't be anything more than a page or a serf. He wasn't anything of any great consequence. And then he rises to the dizzy heights of being a forester. Well, then he must have climbed up whatever tree was in that order of foresters to become a verdiger.
It's like
and he's quite happy.
It's like Jon Snow in Game of Thrones. It's like Jon Snow was modeled after Robin Hood, basically.
Well, at the end of the day, yes. And he's climbing the tree. He's going up the order of verdigers. Then he gets appointed a knight. So as a noble knight, then, this is where his life kind of moves on a little bit. As he starts to get older, he decides that he's eventually going to give his life over to religious pursuits. So that's a lot of the connection that he's had with the church through his life, which is in the legends. A lot of those connections eventually lead him to become a hermit. But then, remembering, he's Richard the Lionheart's man. He's red team. So as soon as John, who's blue team, King John, becomes king and starts causing problems, which John does, wants to tax the North out of existence, then you have the barons actually revolting and saying, hang on a minute, we're going to do Magna Carta. Now, Magna Carta is enormous, in terms of changing the world. It's, even thought to be a forerunner to the Declaration of Independence, the American Declaration. It's one of the first original documents where, people's rights, in this case it's nobles, but it's still, people's rights are actually documented. Now, the very first
Game of Thrones at the end, where it's still the nobles. Yeah. It's just a kind of gentler version of the nobles ruling.
Yeah, but absolutely. I mean, no news stories. But anyway, at this point, they basically, the nobles go and find Robin Hood. They go and find him. He's in his 80s at this point. Oh, really? And they say, look, you're a northern noble. This affects you. Come and join us. So it's clear that he joined with one of the retinues of the other nobles and must have been at Runnymede in 1215 for the signing of Magna Carta. That's pretty much the last thing he does. Because around about the age of 82, 83, he dies. He dies of old age. Maid Marian, I think, finishes up because she's a bit younger than him. So back in the story, she ends up going off and joining a nunnery, which again is pretty typical for medieval times. And it's interesting because I'm going to launch into a great story here because it's all about his merry men. There aren't many records surviving before what we have over here that's called the dissolution of the monasteries, because Henry VIII came to the throne, decided he was going to dissolve all the monasteries, get rid of all the nonsense as he perceived it, and, start the Church of England, which he decided to do. So a lot of the records were destroyed. Before that happened, though, in the early days of King Henry VIII, he got a poet called Skelton. And this is really important. He got Skelton to get into the archives, most of which now, remember, we don't have because they're gone. And he said to Skelton, he said, I want you to do me what is effectively the definitive play on Robin Hood. And I want you to come back and I want you to perform it, etc., etc., etc. So Skelton's play, which has been largely overlooked, is crucial because it has details in it that you don't get anywhere else. Plus the fact, I mean, you know, if you're doing a play for Henry VIII, this is a very powerful man who has a reputation for lopping heads off. Right. So you're not going to make a mess of it. And also the idea that you have to at least play to the right story and have the right characters. That hadn't disappeared. You know, it's kind of printing has only just been invented. So he's going back to handwritten records. Anyway, he does the play. And in the play, all of the merry men are labelled. So you've got Will Scathelock and Will Scarlett, who are both brothers, but they're both criminals, who I think I'm right in saying come from Sheffield. It's there that it's not recorded as Lincoln Green, it's Cumbrian Green or whatever. They go to different places, but it lists all kinds of minor things. It tells you where little Johan came from. It tells you, where they get the arrows from, the arrowheads, where his shirts were dyed so they were green. It's got all these minor details in there. It's incredible. I'm not going to give too much away because it's a great section in the book, so it's worth people buying the book just to get those details. But the point of fact is, it's absolutely geographically correct. It's also linguistically correct. So the names that are given to these people are correct, and it gives you all the background. And you could just take one look at it and just go, hang on a minute, he nailed it. Skelton nailed it with this, because they are the characters that they're said to be in the later legends. Bearing in mind, the records he was relying on would have been records up here in the north, the northern records, that were only a couple of 100 years old at this point, because they were only written down in the 1200s and the 1300s when Robyn became famous. So it's really good stuff. I have got all the sources. All the sources are listed in the book as well if people want to check. It's amazing. The next thing as well that comes up in Skelton's play is Robyn apparently wanted to be buried under the Abbey wall in Wakefield, which is significant for two reasons. First of all, you've got this very famous burial site at Kirkwall, and it's got this grave on it, and it had a burial slab on it with his name on it and all this kind of stuff. And I love this because it's early archaeology. One of the owners of the house in the 1700s, he got one on him one day and he thought, right, this is it. I'm gonna nail this good and proper. I'm going to dig him up. And he went to the grave, he dismantled it and he moved the stone, and they started digging, and almost immediately they hit solid rock. So it's like, okay, there you go. Archaeology, early antiquarian archaeology has proven that is clearly not the burial site of Robin Hood. It's, clearly a fake. It's a distraction. And then you look at Wakefield, which is this place over here, this big city over here, and you think, hang on a minute, Wakefield hasn't got an abbey.
Wait, where's over here?
UK. Over here in the UK, northern England.
Okay, well, all of it's the UK, so...
Well, yeah, the whole thing is... So that's where Wakefield is. And you go to Wakefield and there's no sign of an abbey. Well, just literally year 4 of me writing this book, by sheer coincidence, they happen to be renewing the floor in what is the modern Abbey of Wakefield. And guess what? They come down on a tiny, smaller version of the Abbey, and they dig up a couple of skeletons. I think they brought up 3 skeletons in all, with the exact date range of just after the death of Robin Hood. Now, bearing in mind, they weren't digging. They didn't go down. So there's other burials, older burials lower than them, and it's the configuration of the missing Abbey at Wakefield. So it's like, well, of course we know where he is. I mean, they're not likely to dig up the floor now because it's like a multi-million-pound renovation they've just done. But approximately where they've stuck the new high altar, which by coincidence is a gigantic Templar cross. It's this huge Templar cross-shaped wooden thing they put there. Roughly where that is roughly where Robin Hood's buried, under the wall. And if they find him, I mean, in the play and 1 or 2 other sources, it says he was buried with his bow and his sword and a few other bits and bobs. So looking at the list of what he was buried with, you'd know it was him if you found him, if that makes sense. So, but they never excavated around the walls. I was really frustrated. I was like, get stuck in, go and find him. But no, they did what they were told. They just did the top layer, and that was that. But what a fantastic end to the book.
I have 3 questions for you. One,
go on.
I remember in our last show when we talked about Arthur and the Green Man, you said the Green Man was basically almost like a sign of a union, like you were in a guild or whatever. Would the Foresters be considered part of the Green Men, or is that just a coincidence from different eras?
No, you're absolutely bang on. That's where you get all this Jack in the Green and, Robin Hood being sucked into the Green Man thing. It's the Foresters thing, because the Green Man is the symbol of the Foresters. So there's your link back to that book about the Green Man. It made sense, having done Robin Hood, to then follow it with revealing the Green Man. So Robin Hood is the book immediately before the book I did on the Green Man.
And we already established that was a prize job. Maybe a lower noble got it, or something like that, or maybe like the third son or something like that. Hard job to get, very good job, but not necessarily one that would, that you assumed you would become a knight from. He just happened to be in the right place, right time. But still, like a very, I guess you'd call it maybe like a lieutenant general in the military, but you're probably not going to become a senator. That kind of thing.
Maybe. It's interesting because it's different functions, I suppose. At the end of the day, being a verdiger, being a forester, is a massively ancient and noble pursuit. So I would say if people want to get the background to that, boys, there's some background, dash out and buy the book Revealing the Green Man. And that tells you what Robin Hood's job was and the basis for that job. So it's an amazing job, really is an incredible job for him to get that. That's really good.
Well, you're steward of the wealth. The wealth is the food, is the timber. That was the gold. Aside from that was everything but the gold. That was that was the natural resources. So he was basically in charge of, like, if you were in charge of all of the mines in a region, that's sort of that job.
Yeah, exactly. It's on a level with that kind of a job. It's super duper important. And here's the but. The but bit is, though, at that point, he would be working on lands for Templars. So his boss, as a Green Man, if you like, would have been a knight. Right. It would have been whoever it was that owned that area. So he obviously had a tremendous reputation with the people around him. Otherwise, he'd have probably had his head chopped off for attacking the king. You know what I mean? They obviously realised who he was fairly swiftly. And pulled him off the king, and the king's like, "Oh, yeah, all right then. Time to put you on a different fast track."
So he probably wasn't walking alone. He probably was with a group, and they're like, "Whoa, don't chop his head off."
Yeah. I think the people that pulled him off, I would have thought, would have been in Richard the Lionheart's retinue, but that would have been a bunch of travelling nobles or whatever of a much higher rank than Robin would ever have met. Right. And then Robin's bunch would probably have been his bunch of merry men. And they'd all be cheering him on like, go on, get stuck in, mate. We don't tolerate trespassers around here, And again, we imagine that, that Britain was a wonderfully stable place. Richard the Lionheart was almighty, and nothing ever went wrong. That's not strictly true, because actually the knights, the different bands of knights and the different nobles were still very tribal and very territorial. Right. So there was lots of little skirmishes kicking off all the time. So it wasn't unusual for that sort of thing to happen. Right. Go on, you had a couple more questions.
There was a high king, but he wasn't all-powerful. He still keep people in order, and there was a lot of politics. I get it. Which again, is a little bit like Game of Thrones. But anyway, my second question is probably the most trivial of all, but, was he really this acclaimed, like almost like preternaturally good archer?
I have to say the answer to that is probably yes.
Right.
The archers, when you say archers, everybody who could draw a bow at this point on a Sunday went down to the village green and shot at something with a bow. And there were some guys like the Foresters that kind of did it full time. Now, I've got a couple of these bows here, which are medieval survivals, actually came out of a barn in Yorkshire. And they're like the ones on the Mary Rose, and they're 160-pound draw weight yew bows. So you can't just get hold of them and just pull them back like you see in the movies. These things are serious. And when you excavate the skeletons of people who were professional archers, you usually find one shoulder is bigger than the other. Right. It biologically changed them because they were messing about with...
Your bones get bigger to support the muscles get bigger.
It was something you did all your life.
Yeah.
And Robyn, I mean, clearly at some point, between ages 0 and 16, when he was in Chester, clearly somebody spotted him practicing and gone, hey, hang on a minute, he's got a natural, aptitude to doing this, he's good at it. And I would think that's what eventually brought him into being a forester. There is a tale actually that there was a widow up at one of the family lands, one of the areas they owned, was up near Whitby. That's why you get Robin Hood's Bay up on the sort of northern, what would it be, East Coast, northern East Coast. It's up on that side, the right hand side of Britain. It's like Whitby, Scarborough, Robin Hood's Bay, all that area. And there was a widow there that was having trouble because her lands and her properties were being attacked by basically Vikings, pirates from northern France. And there's this tale that Robyn was up there working on Whitby Castle for one of the families that he was associated with, meets this lady, and she actually employs him to go and sort these Vikings out. So he's out, sailing on one of these ships, and he takes the other ship out with a bow. He shoots everybody on this other ship with a bow and gets rid of them. They're gone. Captures the ship, sails in with it and all the treasure that's on it and everything else. He's very young in the story. He's only about 16 or 17 in the story. And I think that's when the penny drops. I think he's there and he's thinking, I can really make a living doing this, this, and I can use it for good, in very violent times, he could use it. Anybody who knows anything about longbows, they're amazing, what you can do with them. So that part of the story is entirely true. And he did put it to good use. Yeah. It's the O'Malley family that has, lands up in that part of Britain. It's kind of diagonal across the country from Nottingham. So most people... Oh, by the way, Robyn was only in Nottingham 3 days. I forgot to mention that earlier on. Same as Richard the Lionheart. So everyone's like, oh yeah, Nottingham, this, that and the other. Nonsense. He was 16 years in Chester. Anyway.
Yeah, anyone who knows their British and European history, the British longbow was a weapon that made a big difference between the wars between the British and the French. And I think there was a battle at Agincourt, and the British basically could take out the French, basically from, hundreds of feet further than the French could ever get to them. So they won that battle in a rout. And it was basically like, having a cowboy age Winchester rifle rather than a colonial musket. It was, the difference was that significant.
Well, there was a guy in Ireland fairly recently, only in very recent years, that decided he was going to see just exactly what these bows would do. And he had a go at seeing how many arrows he could loose. He got 32 arrows off in a minute.
Wow. So
when you times that by the number of archers that were Agincourt, there must have been this immense hissing noise, and the sky would have gone black. Yeah. And apparently the arrows rained down on the French for 8 minutes. And in 8 minutes, I think it was over 30,000 fully armoured riders and horses just piled up. They just ended up as a huge traffic jam. Right. And it's good night Vienna. That's the end of it. And, bearing in mind that these bows were still on the Mary Rose in the days of Henry VIII. Henry VIII must have known the legends of Robin Hood and thought, hang on a minute, I'm having a bit of this. I want this technology on my flagship, And there they are. There's like boxes and boxes of these bows. So they're just really deadly. And the other piece of trivia as well is the last military unit to have the longbow in use only came to an end, I think, in 1942. They were still using them in the Second World War because they were silent, deadly, and you can shoot over 600 meters. If you know how to drop an arrow onto your target, These things are absolutely deadly. I don't think they've repealed the law over here either. I think us Brits are supposed to be down on our village green, firing at targets still on a Sunday. I don't think that's ever disappeared.
Yeah, of course you
absolutely, you know what I mean?
Listen, sir, I don't want to correct you, but I've seen a lot of ninja movies in the 80s, and I know that technology is very much still employed in ninja and John Wick worlds. So anyway.
There's another guy that decided to see how adaptable it was, so he used a short bow, and he can do somersaults, he can spring, he can loose 2 arrows at once. You know the things you see Legolas doing in the Lord of the Rings movies? He can actually do it in real life, you know what I mean? He's doing a somersault in midair and he pops a balloon with an arrow, It's on the internet. Go and have a look, for anybody that's interested, go check out, this super archery that's possible.
Well, that was the whole thing about the Mongols and the Scythians and the Parthians. Yeah, I mean, somebody even says that the expression "getting a parting shot" comes from the fact that the Parthians could shoot backwards. While they were riding away, they could shoot at you. I'm not sure if that's. I mean,
it's true. No, it's true. Yeah, because there's actual.
I'm just sure that the word "parting" comes from Parthian, but hey, it makes a good story, and if it's true, even the better. Anyway, my third question, which I'm pretty sure that you want to talk about anyway, and I hope so, was the connection to the Templars, because the Templars, everyone's like, "Ooh, the Templars!" I mean, everyone loves the Templars. I mean, Dan Brown and the guy who wrote the Royal Blood, I forgot what the name of the book was called.
There's dozens of them. Yeah, dozens of books.
But anyway, yeah.
Well, we could do like an entire evening just on Templars. It is one of my other specialist subjects, so I'm not really sure where to dive in.
Was Robyn? Let's start with, was Robyn a Templar?
I would say so, yes. And the reason I say that is that there was a gravestone which was drawn during the English Civil War by a guy called Nathaniel Buck, and he drew the gravestone of Robyn. And the Templars have a very distinctive way of doing gravestones. They have a little kind of foot bit down at the foot end, and then they have this long thing that looks like a cross, but when you look at it, it's not, because the cross on the top's equal armed. It looks like a cross with a circle around it, but it's not.
Right.
And what's interesting is we've also got the grave of Little John at Heathersage over here. They know where it is, and his gravestone has also survived and has virtually the same cross on it as the one shown on Robyn's grave. And both of those are Templar gravestones. So it's pretty 99% certain that at some point after Richard probably left instructions and just said, look, get this guy into the order, go through the initiation ceremonies, all the rest of it, whatever you need to do, get it done. We want him in. So he then Robyn literally went back to his roots, because all the guys that were in the Order of the Lion were all effectively a sort of Templar, a form of Templar. So Robyn basically just joined that lot. He just got promoted up into that. So yes, absolutely. I think in his later life, without doubt, he became a Templar. And when he ends up in this cave as a hermit, he's at an abbey, which again makes perfect sense for Templars. As a noble, why would he decide to go and settle at an abbey? Well, it's a Templar foundation. It's a Templar abbey. So the connections in later life really start to rack up. Also, that's the only way you get away with shooting the Sheriff of Nottingham. I mean, all the sheriffs obviously support different factions. They all have different backgrounds. Some of them are nobles with coats of arms. None of them, as far as I could tell, are necessarily Templars. So he could come in then as acting on behalf of King Richard and go, well, hang on a minute, I'm a few pegs up the tree higher than you.
Right.
You're making a mess of this. Good night, Vienna,
License to
kill. Yeah, license to kill, yeah. It doesn't have quite the same ring, does it? You imagine 007 dressed in green carrying a bow.
I mean, that sort of was the Errol Flynn version of Robin Hood, so I can, because that's sort of what I grew up on, aside from the cartoon Fox.
And the tights.
Listen, when you're...
It's a shame about the Disney cartoon, because my favourite character in that is the cockerel. Alan Adale.
Sure.
playing his banjo, doodle all the day. You know, well, do you know what? He's nicked from another legend.
Oh, really?
He had legends of his own. He's just a famous bard that was pinched from elsewhere. There is in the original legend, I hate to say this, there's no Alan a Dale. He's not there.
No minstrel, huh?
So he's in the 25% that is made up.
That's okay. I think I'm not really a minstrel guy anyway. If you're waging war against any invalid lord, or even if you're just part of a civil war, as it turns out to be, you don't need a minstrel. I mean, war drums, I get trumpets.
You're floating into the Mel Brooks, Robin Hood Men in Tights. You're floating into that territory where they burst into song every now and again. I'm not a massive fan of musicals unless they're taking the mickey out of them myself. But there you go.
I famously don't like musicals. So, all right. So he's a Templar, but not seeking the Holy Grail, but it's an order. I know you say you go an afternoon on it, or an evening on it. But what is the significance of being a Templar other than Richard he was a Templar too? So as the king, I imagine he was very high up in the Templar order, if not the head of the Templars. So not only was Robyn the king's man, he was also sort of blessed by this, semi-autonomous, but equally, but high up ruling nobility. So he's sort of blessed through the same individual, but in two nobility classes.
Yeah, I mean, you've nailed it. You've absolutely nailed it.
I struggled with it.
They are autonomous because, as a religious order, they're answerable to the Pope.
Right.
So kings can join the order, but the order is higher up the pecking order than kings, if that makes sense. So they are autonomous. They are incredibly powerful.
Back then, sure. Yeah.
I mean, they're the wealthiest order in the world. They've got an immense wealth. It's actually thought that the wicked King John, I mean, you've got this famous story where he's coming back from Scotland because basically he goes up to Scotland, he marries off his daughter to Malcolm, King of Scotland, and then he goes, right, Malcolm, needless to say, you're going to support me now. And Malcolm goes, tough luck, mate, on your bike, clear off. So he's coming down the East Coast.
The smartest Scots king of all time, the only one that decided not to attack England from the north.
Not to have anything to do with John as well. So there's John coming down the East Coast. He famously then loses his treasure in the wash. Now, it's not clear, what went down in the river. It could have been his treasure, or it could have just been his religious artifacts. But then he ends up then going to Swineshead Abbey. Now, the thing about Swineshead Abbey is he arrives, and there's two different stories about this. And what I found is that Queen Victoria had the story limited. From her records, she just put one particular story into the history that was written in Victorian England. And that was the story that, he just went there and that was that. But there's another story that was written at the time by the monks at Swineshead Abbey that said John arrived there and decided he was going to steal all the treasure off the altar, because there's all this shiny gold and everything, which, needless to say, belongs to the Templars. So now you're on red team, belongs to the red team. So he tries to rob the treasure, and in the process of doing that, the abbot tries to stop him, and John just kills the abbot. So at that point, you can imagine that all the monks and everybody in the abbey's like, we've got to get rid of this bloke. Anyway, 3 days later, John dies. He dies apparently of overeating. But, and this is the big but, when you know what the other story is, I'm convinced he was poisoned. No doubt about it. They just bumped him off.
Listen,
that's the end of the Wicked King John.
If anyone was going to die of overeating, it would have been me. So,
well, there's a surfeit of lampreys and something else. When you read, what he was eating, it was like apples and fish and goodness knows what else, and you're like,
I think you're right.
That's going to give you some wicked indigestion. But when you know the alternative story to how he was behaving,
well, the Templars also, kind of think, I mean, you can't talk about Templars without talking about ties to alchemy, and
absolutely. So they're just like, okay, we're above the king, we're above royalty. This guy's acting like an asshole.
Poison and seasonings on the buffet table, and you got the glutton there. Hey,
He's in bed with the French. He's trying to get in bed with the Scots. He's a tax collector. Richard's just died, so they've just lost a hero. He's come all the way down from Scotland, lost all the royal treasures somewhere along the way.
Right.
He turns up at an abbey, that's Templar, and tries to steal what's at the abbey. I mean, this guy's doomed. He's broken all the rules of Magna Carta already. I think he broke them 3 times before he eventually died. So everybody's just sick to death of him.
Also sounds like a metaphor. Die of overeating doesn't sound like a metaphor for just being piggish generally.
Well, yeah, it's just at the end of the day, that was the end of the Wicked King John. So I personally, again, you can read the conspiracy, you can see the facts that they're in the book, which is why I said, the story of Robin Hood as you gave it at the beginning, most eloquently, I say. That story is very much the Victorian romantic. It's kind of had all the rough bits sanded off. And what I've done is I've gone all the way back and I've basically put that back in. I've put the gritty realism back in. I mean, there's one amazing bit where Robin actually, he gets hunted down by a Scottish mercenary. And the Scottish mercenary doesn't get the better of Robin. They have a massive bust up and Robin kills the mercenary. But then what he then does is he chops the head off the mercenary, sticks the head onto the end of his bow and pretends that he's the mercenary. But the idea of, Errol Flynn slicing some bloke's head off and sticking it on the end of his bow as a spike and marching into town with it going, oh, look, I've killed Robin Hood. That is just anathema. It's not there in the new stories at all. And these, there's another one as well where he robs a monk by dressing as a lady.
Uh-huh.
You don't find that either. He turns up dressed as a lady and the monk just accepts him. And then he can rob the monk.
Right.
But when you realise how corrupt the monks were, these are the monks of the abbeys in York, and it's a powerful kind of pseudo-Viking type capital city, York, and you know where these monks are coming from, and they're not behaving like they should be.
Right.
So what he's doing is he's actually robbing from the rich to shame the rich, because he ends up giving the money back in the end to pay a ransom that the corrupt monks have imposed on another knight. So when you actually look at what he's doing, it's got nothing to do with robbing from the rich to give to the poor. He never does that. That would have been socially unacceptable for him and the rest of his men to do that.
He's robbing from the corrupt rich to go to give back to a different rich who at least have a claim of right to it.
Or fooling the corrupt rich. That's his thing. It's modern in a sense that the problems we've got in the modern day and age are with people in power. So you have to deal with those people in power in powerful ways, almost be one of them in order to sort them out. You've got to have equal power. And that's what you're actually seeing in the original tales of Robin Hood. He's fighting on a level playing field, and then eventually gets promoted by Richard the Lionheart. So it's no longer a level playing field. He's risen that little bit higher and he can seriously kick ass now. So that's the kind of level we're at. Everybody else, the general population, isn't really included in the early stories to that extent.
Okay, so we've shattered the myth also of rob from the rich to give to the poor. He did rob from the rich at times, but it wasn't for the social welfare. It was just to make good on something for somebody that was on his team, in his nobility, or to curry favor, or to consolidate his power, or whatever the case would be. It was for team.
There is how can I put it? There's kind of a medieval moral to everything he does.
Sure.
There's a point to it. None of it's random. It's all absolutely specific. But if people who are out there slightly of an academic leaning, and they understand medieval society and they approach it archaeologically and historically, which is obviously how I've done it, when you start to read what's in the book, obviously it makes more sense when you look at the real thing than all the nonsense that comes after it, which again is, I suppose, to sort of bow out where I came in. After writing the book after 4 years, I totally believe that he was a real person. He really genuinely existed. I know people struggle with the idea that maybe he was alive in the 13th century or the 12th century or the 11th century. At the end of the day, they had this habit back then of naming the children after the oldest male. So you've got like Robin Hood gives birth to Robin Hood, who in turn gives birth to Robin Hood, and so on. I mean, I did my family tree, for example, and there's 13 Johns. It's like John John.
Yeah.
John. It goes all the way through the medieval period. So you've got to be very careful. You've really got to push your source material to get back to a date. But at the end of the day, it all fits. That's the key to it. There's 2 family trees in the book as well. One's on his mother's side and the other's on his father's side. And both of those family trees are historically correct.
Oh, that's
okay,
great.
So we know who he was, or at least where he was in terms of the families that he was a part of.
Family trees are very appropriate for a book about a forester. So that's terrific. So, I had a question. I lost it. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I lose it all the time. And questions.
I know. If only I was a professional host.
Hey, listen, you still asked me the 3 that you had in mind. So
I did, and actually, you answered the 4th before I even had to bring it up.
Well, we were on the subject of Templars, if that's any help. You were sort of looking at their influence, and
do you want to
ask about Templars themselves?
Sure, we can do a little sidetrack on Templars, but my question was that I lost and now I recovered was, did our blue and green team ultimately prevail over the red team?
Well, it's interesting. All the books that I've written coming up to date, so right up to the Arthur book, I've tended to focus on material that you would call northern. So if you're looking at the British Isles, there was a kingdom, if you like, a sub-kingdom called the Old North. And the Old North is basically the middle of it all. So if you look at the British Isles, you've got like Ireland over here, and you've got Scotland and England and Wales and down south and Cornwall. If you just draw a big circle around all of that and stick a pin in the middle, you're going to hit just north of Chester. You're going to come in right in the middle. And the Old North was this kingdom that was just that. So it basically was North Wales and Cheshire and Lancashire and Cumbria and parts of the Pennines, and it stretched across, onto the Isle of Man and kind of clips a bit of Ireland. And that's the Old North. That's what you're looking at. Now then, the reason I'm telling you this is those areas were established in Roman times. So that's the territory that you find in King Arthur's day. So either side of 500 AD, that is that territory. That territory then survives into Saxon times. The Saxons then get invaded by the Vikings and the Danes because they come next in history. And it's the Vikings that establish the territory that you find in Doomsday. So now you're into William the Conqueror. So he does his Doomsday survey. And guess what? Those areas are still clustered together. They're still forming the Old North. The Old North then is the area that Robin Hood is born into. Right. So you've got the same territory again. That territory then keeps going after Robin about as long as just before the Tudors. So when you get the Wars of the Roses, you get the Red Rose of Lancashire fighting the White Rose of Yorkshire, and they have this big bust up, and you finish up with all these different royal houses coming out as a result of it. So you're in sort of proper serious high medieval now. They're full plate armor and the whole 9 yards. That area where all that's coming from is still the Old North. So eventually you've got 2 what are called Palatine counties left, which Palatine in Britain means self-governing. And these self-governing counties were only discontinued, they only did away with them in 1973. Huh. One of them was Cheshire and the other was Lancashire. So those are the core, if you like, the core counties of the Old North. They were still Palatine right up to the 1970s. So when you focus on that, I mean, I know you guys in America, you'll all be like, oh, London this, London that, London the other, Yeah, fine, it's the modern day capital, loads going for it ever since the days of the Vikings, but it is not the real heart. It's not the real powerhouse, if you like, of historical Britain. The real powerhouse is up here. Now, back to your question. So the red team, if you like, is the Old North. That's what it is. It's that core area. And it survives way, way after the death of John. So the blue team just fizzles out. It just disappears. It becomes what we now interpret basically as English. That's everything that's English. You know what I mean? The Old North becomes what was eventually Celtic, Welsh Celtic. So it's got kind of a right, if you like, to claim connections to Scotland and to Wales and to Northern Ireland, because it's more connected to those historically than it is to the bit that's English.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of way broad kind of sweep of the brush to how to understand the British Isles. So the British Isles really is basically cut into those two halves. But the Old North is bullseye. You know, the Old North is the centre. It's the business end, if you like, of history. So no, it doesn't vanish. It never really goes away. Even now, you know, the government over here are talking about this northern powerhouse. It's never been anything but. You know, you get Liverpool, Manchester, the Mersey Valley, you push them together with where I'm living, which is Warrington, right in the middle, and then you start looking at all the surrounding towns and cities, easily as big as the area of London. You know, easily. But we're up here. You know, we're up north.
Right.
So,
but below
I don't know if that.
So
yeah, so that kind of answers the question. The red team never really went away. That kind of core consciousness has never disappeared. And everybody living in London and the government and all this, they've never been able to get rid of it. You know, we're still here.
See,
I mean, we actually supplied royalty, proper, serious, you know, medieval kings in the king and queen list to, Elizabeth as was and Charlie who's there now. We actually supplied kings for the throne of England for 564 years. That's king after king after king after king after king. They're all coming from the north. And the very last one is Anglo-Scottish and north. So you can't get much northern than that.
No.
So really, the entire ruling house, you know, the real business end, the real business end of what's running the British Isles, in sense, is coming from here. You know, it's coming from this neck of the woods.
Well, then at some point the Germans came in, and then I guess.
Oh yeah, modern times.
Someone else did the Germans,
times.
sort of. I don't exactly know what happened between the Habsburgs and what is it now? The Windsors? Are they? Is that the family?
Well, yeah. That's you're only going back to sort of Queen Victoria's day there, really. You know, and there was a big argument somewhere before that. I mean, historically in the 1700s, you've got this big thing over here about Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Stuarts, the Stuart royals. The Stuarts, if you like, were the end of what I've just described, right. This huge medieval, you know, thing that was going on. And some people still think the Stuarts should be on the throne, you know. Back to Templars again, actually. Rumour has it that the current Stuart heir, which I think is 16th in line to the throne or something, the current heir is actually in contact with and regularly visits the Templars of Scotland.
Oh, I'm down with that.
So, you know what I mean? They've not give up. The history I teach, the history I give away and the stuff I put in the books is still relevant, you know, and then some.
History is never static and it's never an isolate. I mean, that's what people. This is why I'm not afraid of any 10 family or 10 person cabal ruling the world, because there's no 10 families that are that powerful that would ever agree with each other. It is not. There's been no time in human history where it's ever been shown that nobody doesn't want to be the top dog. So
true.
Anyway, enough about that, because I know a bunch of my audience doesn't want to hear that at all, which is fine too. So yeah, back to the Templars, because everybody wants to hear about Templars. So I don't know if we can do a quick and dirty on Templars. I've done past shows on Templars, so you know, Gretchen Cornwell talked about them, Arthur Farham talked about it, Andrew Goff talked about them. So you know, it's not like we haven't talked properly about Templars before. But I think this seems like a good time to do a quick and dirty on Templars, sort of post 1000 to pre 1400, Britain at least, or UK.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, in a nutshell, I suppose I'll just stick to what they're most famous for. I mean, monks carrying swords. That is a Celtic Culdee thing. It goes back to the Roman era when the Culdees, who were the Celtic holy men in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, when they were evangelizing over here, they were known to walk around basically wearing robes, long cloaks, which are these cream-coloured woolen hoodies, which clearly that's where the Templars are getting theirs from,
right, like Jedis.
Correct. And you got monks carrying swords, So by the time it gets to medieval times, the monks have been wandering around in this country carrying swords for 700-800 years. So it's nothing new. And there's biblical stuff as well that supports that. We won't get into that because it gets complicated, but it goes back a long way, the idea that you can protect yourself with a sword. And the cloaks, these woolen cloaks, are famous that the Celts of Britain produced them, so much so that they were a major export to the continent in Roman times. We made these brilliant cloaks. The idea, by the way, of Templars, charging into battle with a big red target on the front, dressed in white in a desert, that's nonsense. When they were out there, they had desert colours. They had browns and blues and blacks. The crosses were never much bigger than your hand. Uh-huh. They would stitch them on. And that's only for recognition amongst themselves. Right. And they would allow their armour to go rusty. They would paint it out, So when you see them on the History Channel going, way, you know what I mean? Yeah. Bearing in mind that the people that they're fighting against have got compound bows, they're really good shots. You're not going to go charging in with this whopping great big target painted on you. It's just nonsense. So all that's just made up. That's rubbish. Yeah, you got it. You got it in one. That's it. Yeah, X marks the spot. No, that's fantasy. The actual Order of Templars, I mean, they say it started in 1118, but there's evidence that, it didn't. It was a, militia of Christ. It started in 1114, but there's some evidence that's recently come up that they started earlier in 1112. So there's no reason to assume that they didn't kind of gather together just after the First Crusade came to an end. So they're there very early on, and they've been part of the fabric for a while. These are not newcomers. They're just gathering everything that's gone before and just making something out of it, which is what human beings do. The actual first order to get properly recognised, if you like, which I think was 1112, is actually the Hospitallers.
Right.
So, forget your red and white, because your white on black came first. Pardon me. And those two orders stay together. And they work together.
Hoode Payne and
Hoode Payons and Godfrey de St. Omer. Yeah, they get recognised by the Pope. Can't remember which one at the time. I haven't got my notes with me. But the Pope rubber stamps them and says, yeah, there you go, you can be an order. But the Hospitallers had already had that, 6, 7, 8 years before. You can almost imagine the pair of them getting together, Hospitallers and Templars. And, they meet in a pub in Jerusalem, and the Hospitallers are like, hey, you want to get on this? Bandwagon. It's really good, this. Get yourselves together, make an order and get on with it. So the Templars come next. But you've got other orders as well. You've got the Knights of Lazarus, you've got Patriarch of Jerusalem's forces, you've got Knights of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. They're not unique,
right?
Not by any means. They're part of what's going on in Jerusalem. But what is unique is, if you read the King Arthur book, it's the Templars who the Islamic world record as being guardians of the Grail. So the Templars basically get involved with the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and they get involved in getting the Grail out of Jerusalem during the war years of the Crusades. So that's an interesting beginning for them.
Sure.
That's where they start. Then they develop, they just grow and grow and grow. And as knights die, they bequeath things to the order, so they end up with castles and lands and money and treasure and a navy. And, you can do an awful lot of stuff like that in 300 years. You really can. But they're dying on the Crusades. There are at least 9 or 10, possibly more, maybe 12 or 13 Crusades, depending on how you look at it. And the knights are dying. So you end up with female knights, because the ladies then start to inherit from the men, and the ladies join the order. So they seem very even-handed. But when you know a bit about the Celts, and you know a bit about how the Celts did things, then that's all the Templars are doing. Because the Celts were very even-handed. They worshipped the head. They had green men. They had swords. Their church was different. The way they did things was different.
Gaia, Mother Earth.
Yeah. By the time you look at how they're doing it, you look at the Templars and you think, hang on a minute, they're just medieval Celts. Basically, that's what they are. So that's a key to understanding what's going on. But eventually they get really powerful. I mean, in southern France, the records there show that some of the Templar preceptories, the women knights outnumbered the male 2-1 or even 3-1. Now, when the order gets dissolved, 1314, they don't just get dissolved because the Pope has a hearing, and over the next 80 years, they are absolved. The religious establishment never really wanted to lose them. It was politics. It was, a money and land grab, a property grab by Philip the Fair, King of France. So in 1314, he tries to grab everything. 1307 is the arrest of the Templars. Right. Yeah, that's the famous one, 1307. But it's interesting because Friday the 13th, he goes to arrest all the Templars. But on Thursday the 12th, the Navy set sail because they got tipped off. So that's where that famous thing comes from. They set sail under the black flag with a white cross on it, which became the skull and crossbones. That's another story, where the treasure went and all that. Like I said, we'll do a whole night on this. But then eventually, they Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charnay, get roasted in this pit in the Seine. On a fire in 1314, they cursed the king and they cursed the Pope to join them within the year, and you got this famous legend that, of course, king and Pope were both dead within the year, right. Which again points back to what happens in the Robin Hood book. When they bump off John, it does make you wonder just how powerful they were. But in this country, it's interesting because you've got 3 King Edwards: Edward I, Edward II, Edward III. All those kings really liked the Templars,
even Scissorhands. Longshanks. Yeah. Edward Longshanks, sorry.
Yeah, Edward I is Longshanks. Yeah. I mean, not a guy to be messed with.
Scissorhands was a Tim Burton movie.
yeah, and you can understand why he likes Templars. Well, Edward II was the same, and Edward III is the same. So it's not until about 1334 that King Edward III over here says, could you kind of disappear, lads? You're not supposed to still be here. So the Templars then kind of vanish into Scotland, Ireland, and Wales because that's out of the Pope's reach, and also they've had 30 odd years there, 30 odd years where they can transfer all the property over to the Hospitallers, which is exactly what they did on the continent. So, the King Philip got nothing, absolutely nothing. Hundreds of years later, the royal families of France were still trying to get money out of the Hospitallers that they claimed was owed to them by the Templars. So they never got a penny, never got anything at all. Complete disaster. Anyway, over here, you've then got Order of the Garter starts. You've got Knights of the Round Table starts up. So basically, the Templars rebrand.
Right.
So what I'm getting to here, what I'm really getting to is that the idea that they suddenly just ended isn't true. For about the next sort of 50, 60, 70, 80 years, other groups of Templars were popping up all over the place. You've got Red Cross on a white background over in Switzerland for Swiss banking. You've got all these groups of mercenaries popping up. There's another knightly order called Knights of the Fleur-de-Lis that start up, and they've got Anglo-Scottish, Anglo-European connections. They're just all over the place, and all it is rebranded Templars. And then, and this is the kicker, the survivors of the Templars end up slowly coming out towards the end of that 80-year period. So by the time you've got to the 1400s, with people like Joan of Arc and all the rest of it in that particular century, you've actually got Templars back again. Maybe they're not calling themselves Templars, but they're back.
Right.
And that is the survival, if you like, of the modern order of Templars. So nowadays they're still here, but there's 3 different kinds really of Templars you've got here. You've got Masonic Templars, which you can only really trace them back to the start of Masonic records. So they only really go back to the 1723 Masonic, charter or whatever. So they only go back to that. So the first book on Masonry.
Unless you believe their legend that it goes back to Cain. So, right.
Well, it depends, but I'm only looking at Templars here rather than Masons. So the Templars, certainly the association, can only go back to the foundation, really, of Masons as we've got them now. Right. But you've got Masonic Templars. You've still got survival of Catholic Templars. So there are independent groups of Templars that can trace their genealogy, if you like, back quite a long way, hundreds of years. And they're all over Europe. They're everywhere. So you'll see them emerging now. You've probably got them in America. You'll have American Templars, but they have different emphasis.
Well,
but that's what's happening.
Some are real and some will just claim to be. So,
yeah. And then you've got other Templars. And I'm going to say other Templars because things like the Templar Trust take pilgrims out to the Middle East. There was a temperance movement called the Templar Trust. So you've got lots of what I would call minor Templar connections, which are very public and they're usually charitable in their intentions. So really those three branches are the ones you're dealing with now. That everybody falls into at least one of those categories. The ones in Scotland, for example, Rosslyn Chapel, they're one of the middle group. They're the ones that say, well, we never ended.
Right.
It never went away. And if you look at the style, for example, of Scottish medieval burials in the clan burial grounds, the actual style never changes. So the Templar burials that are clearly Templars in the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s, just carries on in the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s. It's all the same. You can clearly see that it never changes. Yeah. So they have probably got a decent claim to being one of those groups of Templars that have survived into modern times.
Well, shameless plugs to shows I referenced earlier. Andrew Goff does an excellent job on the origin of the Templars, and I believe it's called the Poussin Code, or because apparently it's the Templars are much more tied to the artist Poussin than Da Vinci, but he goes through a lot of the history. Arthur Farham takes us from Europe through Scotland into North America, and Gretchen Cornwell basically covers some of the same ground, but takes us mostly through Canada into North America, and she's currently doing, I think, season 2 of The Curse of Oak Island. So you're not our only TV star, and Andrew Goff, I think, is also on. He's doing something on Gaia channel and maybe Discovery as well. So
yeah, he was on something to do with forensic solving of world mysteries.
Yeah,
I spotted him on there. I think he was on Blaze over here, or
he's all over
Quest,
the place.
one of those.
He just did a TED Talk, an 18-minute TED Talk on our ideology of the bees. And the good news for Garden of Doom listeners, you don't need to listen to his 18-minute TED Talk. We have like 100 minutes of him going, so he's not rushing through. And it's called, I'm so clever, the Be All and End All, but BEE. But I have to tell you, that show, I'm like, what am I doing? And it was fascinating. It's one of my favorite shows because I had no expectations going in. It's fascinating. So check that out. And I'm actually recording with Andrew this Thursday, which I think is March 23rd or 24th. And we're going to do Tartaria. So Tartarian. So yeah, it'll be Andrew's also his fourth visit into the garden. So very excited about that, and it's cool that you know each other, or at least know.
Yeah, he's a really nice guy. We met many years ago and sort of chatted just as acquaintances. And then we met again last year, and it was like, oh, I know you. And he's like, I know you too. Where do I know you from? And it was a massive catch up, and he's just a lovely bloke. He's
so smart,
bit of a star.
Yeah,
we research totally different things. Come at it from a different viewpoint. But
sure.
I like, for example, something like the Templars is a subject where I would encourage people to read around it. Don't just get hold of one book and stick to that like glue. And again, try and focus on what people can prove to be true. Been some amazingly good TV programs recently about Templars where they've looked at artifacts and archaeology and buildings and sites. And, the biggest problem is that the main Templar archive, which was on, I think it was on Cyprus, the Ottomans destroyed it in something like 1542. They think they set fire to it and just burnt it and destroyed it. So that's a shame. It says something about hanging onto your filing system, I guess.
Yeah, well, listen to this, America. Burning books, banning books, never a good idea.
No, really bad.
Never end.
Yeah, just as a general piece of wisdom, by the way, and it's still true, if somebody tells you that a particular book is banned or you're not allowed to read it, go and find it and read it.
I'm not saying every book has value. I'm just saying banning books is always a bad idea. I'm not even saying every book deserves to be in print, but it's just a better idea. Don't ban books.
Yeah.
Kids, that's what you have parents for. Parents, that's why you're parents. And, I'll just leave it at that.
And always read around subjects. Always, go as far as you can and read around them. Definitely.
Yeah,
the more you know, the better.
Right. It's not like if you read Mein Kampf, you're going to become a fascist despot. I mean, maybe it just gives you perspective into how people think, and that can help you in how you approach the world and choose to behave yourself. And if it does turn you into a fascist despot, I mean, I don't know how you got that power being where you are, but you were probably already on the path to some sort of ill-begotten future anyway. Anyway, I had no...
Yeah, people who tend to end up in positions of power, actually, you look at them and you can almost see what they didn't read. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? They get hold of something and they don't read around, whatever it is they do. So you look at them and you think, you've got such a, skewed monocultural view of, whatever it is that they're going on about, as a leader. And you think, why don't we have someone who's, more intellectual and more rounded and, better read, etc. So just by looking at these people, you think, where on earth are they coming from? But then again, I suppose if you know what you know, you probably wouldn't aspire to be that type of person. The more knowledgeable and rounded you are, the less likely you are to want any kind of power. It's... I don't envy them in terms of the ride they're on.
Yeah, it's, somebody pretty smart said, "Heavy is the head that wears the crown," and I can tell you from my minor experience with that. Yes, true.
Totally.
And if you can find a way to survive, relatively comfortably without having to do that, it's much better. You can actually really enjoy life much more. At least I have. And really no business doing so in sort of, solid middle age, depending on when you say middle age starts, but late 40s, mid 50s, that I don't know that I've ever had more fun than now. Anyway, I had no idea that Robin Hood was going to get us into the Templars, but I think that's awesome because we sort of did two shows in one, and that's terrific. Yeah. We're gonna hear from Mark again in a few short months. He's got his little black cat there. I'm going to ask.
Yeah, my cat's just showed up.
Yeah, wants a little attention. Good. Look out for Pepe Le Pew. I
was going to say he always does this. He gets to the end of an interview and he's usually on the sofa behind me, or he brings his tail into view or something. He's been all over the world. People have seen this cat everywhere.
He's a real star, international sensation. Get him on TikTok.
Yeah,
don't use TikTok. Use Instagram.
There you go.
But I thank you so much. Listen, this is the time where you tell people where to follow you and what your books are and where to buy them and stuff like that.
Okay, as I always say, really, really simple. If you want to buy any product whatsoever, by the end of this year, there'll be 9 books in total on Amazon. Just go to Amazon, type my name in. If you're not sure how to spell the book cover or whatever, if you type me in, I'm sure it'll come up. But if you do go for the Robin Hood one, ROBYNHOODE, it's the life and times of the real Robin Hood. So you'll find it straight away. And again, Green Man's there, Arthur's there, all the other books are there. So really easy. Amazon, pay your money, click, collect. A few days later, whizzes through your door. If you want to get me, I'm primarily on Facebook. I know some people hate that platform now, but I'm still there. I've been there a long time.
It's getting popular. Find me on... It's getting repopularized because people don't like Twitter anymore.
Well, yeah, it goes in swings and roundabouts. But come and find me on Facebook, and you can always message me on Messenger. If you send me a friend request, I tend to accept most people, unless you've got, like a little picture with a unicorn on and your name's Fifi Trixabel and you've got no photos. I'm not going to friend you if you do that. Don't be silly. It's called Facebook for a reason. There's got to be a face there with an identity. So, yeah, come and find me and you can send me messages. So it's Amazon for product, Facebook for me, Facebook Messenger. And if you want to book me for anything or anything else, you can always get me on Messenger and I'll give you my email once I know who you are, that you're a real person and not a robot.
It's Mark with a K. Olly is Olly. Very easy. It's exactly how it sounds. And for all of you listening, I want to thank you for listening to Garden of Doom, and I would like to ask you also to write a review, give a 5-star rating. Oh, no. Before I did the YouTube thing, it didn't have commercials. All right, here we go. Sorry for that, everybody. Here we go. The theme song to The Adventures of Robin Hood is playing in the background. There we go. So give a 5-star rating, a review, write a nice review, tell your friends, and forgive my editorial miscues. You've heard the excuse a million times. Enjoy the song. We will hear from you next time in the Garden of Doom.
Robin Hood, Robin Hood. He called the greatest archers to a tavern on the green. They vowed to help the people of the king. They handled all the trouble on the English country scene and still found plenty of time to sing. Robin Hood, riding through the glen. Robin Hood, with his band of men, feared by the bad, loved by the good. Robin Hood, Robin Hood, Robin Hood.